Well, the trial in Minneapolis has brought the story of the death of George Floyd, of policing in the US, and the question of systemic racism back to the forefront. After Floyd's death, widespread protests were held not just across the United States but around the world, including in Canada, the UK, and here in France. The chants Black Lives Matter echoed by demonstrators everywhere. Our guest today has looked at the impact Floyd's death and the demonstrations that followed have had on that wider context and how they've sometimes been interpreted as foreign values that divide more than unite. Jean Pierre Le Glaunec, thanks for your time. Can I start by asking you, we're seeing once again this week protests in Minneapolis as the trial of Derek Chauvin gets underway. That courtroom behind barricades, that defence, a message protesters say that justice will not be served.
Well, yes, there's a strong possibility that justice will not be served. Justice was not served back in 2013 after the death of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman was acquitted. Justice was not served either in 2014 when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and justice was not served very recently when Breonna Taylor was killed by police in Louisville, Kentucky. So there is a strong possibility indeed that justice will not be served. And historically, history has not been served on a constant basis in the States, in North America, or in countries where slavery and post-slavery have existed. So yes, it is a very strong possibility.
You mentioned there Trayvon Martin in 2013. It was after that death that the Black Lives Matter movement began. We've seen it, large protests regularly across the US when there's been similar deaths, but they've often petered out again and faded away. But since George Floyd's death, do you think that things have taken a turn, a change?
Well, yes, I would think things have taken a turn. It seems that Black Lives Matter has become a full-fledged movement, a social movement, and quite a big one, really. It's quite different from the one, in the 1960s and 1970s. The civil rights movement was a more centralized political and social movement, and Black Lives Matter seems to be a decentralized one. But clearly, since the death of George Floyd, things have moved on, and it can be. I think that the speed at which it's moving on can be seen in the agenda that Black Lives Matter is putting forward. Defund the police, defunding the police has become the key, the keystone of the movement, of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's quite a strong. There's quite a strong current behind that agenda, that new agenda of Black Lives Matter.
And you've taken a look at how people are picking up on that agenda and turning it, if you like, on its head in many ways. A lot of neoconservatives saying that they're doing more to divide rather than to unite people.
Yes, indeed, yes. Well, you can hear that in the States, of course, but it's also quite vocal here in Quebec or Canada or in France, the UK. At the beginning of the interview, you mentioned the fact that the neoconservative movement is trying to makes the point that foreign values are being imported outside of the United States, and the racial problem, according to the neoconservative movement, is only an American problem. Actually, it is not. The racial paradigm is a paradigm that has been inherited from the slavery period and the post-slavery period. So the Black Lives Matter movement today and after the death of George Floyd is trying to move ahead and make sure that we are moving towards post-racial societies. And that is, I think, what we should keep in mind.
How do you think the United States compares to the likes of Canada or indeed here in France when it comes to recognising its past and indeed enslavement?
Well, it's a very good question, I think. The United States, I do believe there are more similarities than differences between the States or Canada or France or the UK. Similarities in how, in the post-slavery period, yes, indeed, slavery was abolished by the States in 1865, it was abolished by France in 1848, by the UK in 1833, but pretty much everywhere, whether it is the States or France or the UK or here, Quebec, the racial paradigm, stayed the dominant paradigm, and how social and political relationships were built. Today, the phrase white power is not just a phrase put forward by militants across the world. White power is something that is, tangible, real, in how social relationships are constructed in the U.S. And of course, in the U.S., it's quite specific in the way the black struggle for rights in the 1960s and 70s gave birth to, important victories for the black movement, for black people. But things have advanced. Things have moved in the good direction, but so much remains to be done. And it's quite clear, that the death of George Floyd gives ample evidence that things need to be done in order for the racial paradigm to be totally destructed.
We have seen, since the death of George Floyd, we've seen this George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It's now been passed by the House of Representatives, going forward to the Senate. But there is still quite a bit of resistance to it, notably among the Republican Party. How do you see that resistance? They say it goes too far.
Yes, well, it goes too far, and this is not a new argument. It's an argument that has been put forward by the Republicans or by some Democrats ever since the late 1960s, early 1970s, when Nixon was elected. Nixon was elected, and he promised at the time he promised the white majority. He promised a silent majority, law and order. And today, it's an American obsession, law and order, in the Republican Party, but also in large swaths of the Democratic Party. So it's going to be a tough call, this law. It's quite possible that the Senate will not approve it. And I don't think the United States has reached a point where it can actually, defund the police or rethink totally the way its police is organized. The police in the States has been militarized, heavily militarized, since the mid-1990s.
Jean Pierre Le Glaunec, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for bringing us your perspective. You're watching live from Paris. If you're just joining us, these are our top stories. A US appeals court looking at whether or not to add third-degree murder to the charges against former police officer Derek Chauvin. Jury selection in that trial for the murder of George Floyd underway. And protests continuing this Tuesday in Myanmar. Student activists who have been trapped by security forces in one city did manage to flee, but the anti-coup demonstrations going ahead once again. This as the military cracks down on media outlets there.